George Romero invented the modern zombie in 1968. By 1980, everyone else had decided they could do it too. They could not. But the attempts are considerably more interesting than the successes. Zombie films from the 1980s that exist outside every conversation about the genre, made on budgets that would not cover a single day of a Romero production, by filmmakers who had specific ideas about what a zombie film should be and insufficient resources to execute those ideas, and made them anyway. Nazi zombies guarding desert gold, a rock band that dies and comes back to finish their set, zombies climbing out of a television set. Nobody asked for any of this. That is precisely why it exists. Zombie Lake, 1981. During the German occupation, a squad of Nazi soldiers was ambushed and summarily executed by local French resistance fighters. To avert brutal reprisals from the Third Reich, the villagers submerged the corpses in a nearby lake, initiating a decades-long institutional silence, a community pact that decided collective amnesia was safer than acknowledgement. Eurocine released Zombie Lake through the French and Spanish exploitation networks before it entered the international VHS market, where it found an audience that the film's production circumstances had not been designed to reach, and that the film's specific formal qualities rewarded in ways that the exploitation format's conventional audience had not anticipated. Jean Rollin was brought onto the production as a replacement director after the original filmmaker departed, a circumstance that gave Rollin approximately no preparation time and a budget that the original production had already substantially depleted, conditions that he converted through the visual intelligence of a filmmaker who had been making atmospheric horror on minimal resources since 1968. The lake setting, an actual French lake shot in the specific quality of early morning light that Rollin understood, was the only production value the budget could not take away, gives the zombie sequences a visual beauty that the underwater photography amplifies rather than diminishes. The Nazi uniforms visible through the water, with a clarity that the practical limitations of the underwater camera had accidentally made more rather than less effective. Howard Vernon plays the mayor with the authority of an actor whose European exploitation career had given him a specific understanding of how to anchor a production whose other elements were less stable. The underwater sequence, the zombie soldiers rising from the lakebed, the specific visual quality that Rollin's cinematographic intelligence extracted from the practical limitations of underwater shooting on a depleted budget, was the image most cited by the international cult audience as the formal achievement that separated Zombie Lake from the Nazi zombie cycle it belonged to. Zombie Lake has been released through Redemption Films in a restoration. Jean Rollin made The Grapes of Death and The Living Dead Girl in the same period. Howard Vernon appeared in over 200 films. The French lake location has been identified by location historians. Zombie Lake rose its undead from a French lake with the visual intelligence that Jean Rollin brought to every budget he was given. The video Dead rose its undead from something considerably more contemporary. A television set in a suburban American house through a mechanism that the 1987 home video market had made feel more plausible than it had any right to.
What is this shit?
Video Dead, 1987, directed by Robert Scott. A television set that cannot be turned off arrives at a suburban house and begins releasing zombies into the neighborhood. And the family that subsequently moves in discovers that the previous occupant's solution to the zombie problem was considerably less effective than the instruction manual that arrives with the set had suggested. Interstate 5 Productions released the video Dead through the American regional VHS market in 1987, a distribution strategy that placed it in rental stores where the box art communicated a premise so specifically calibrated to the home video moment that the format itself became part of the horror. Robert Scott wrote and directed the video Dead as his only feature film, a circumstance that the production's specific formal qualities reflect in both directions. The first-time director's inexperience producing uneven pacing, and the first-time director's specific vision producing a central premise that no studio development process would have permitted to survive intact. The television set, a standard consumer unit dressed by the production design team with the specific modifications that the premise required, is shot by Scott with the visual attention of a filmmaker who understood that the set needed to feel like a presence rather than a prop. The suburban setting, shot in actual California neighborhoods, with the documentary attention to the specific texture of American domestic life in the late 1980s, gives the zombie sequences a geographic grounding that the horror premise needs to feel as immediate as the home video format had made the television set feel. The mirror sequence, the zombies' specific vulnerability to their own reflection, a rule the film establishes and deploys with the procedural patience of a production that had decided the internal logic of its premise was worth developing regardless of the budget available to develop it, was the formal decision most cited by the VHS audience as the element that separated the video Dead from the zombie films surrounding it in the rental market. The video Dead has been released through Vinegar Syndrome in a restoration. Robert Scott made no further films. The television set used in production has not been located. The video Dead brought its zombies through a television set with the specific logic of a filmmaker who had thought the premise through. Oasis of the Zombies brought its zombies through the Sahara Desert with the specific atmospheric patience of a filmmaker who had made over 100 films and understood that atmosphere was the one production value that a depleted budget could not entirely remove. Oasis of the Zombies, 1982. A group of treasure hunters travel to the Saharan desert to locate gold, hidden by a German Africa Corps unit during World War II, and discover that the soldiers who died guarding the gold have been guarding it ever since, with a patience that the desert's specific geography has made comprehensive and inescapable. Eurocine released Oasis of the Zombies through the Spanish and French exploitation networks before it entered the international VHS market under multiple titles, a distribution strategy that reflected the film's specific position between the Nazi zombie cycle that Shockwaves had established and the desert adventure format that the treasure hunt premise was operating within. Jesus Franco directed the film under the pseudonym A.M. Frank, a production identity that the Eurocine arrangement had required, and that Franco deployed with the philosophical detachment of a filmmaker whose 100-plus filmography had given him a specific relationship to the distinction between credited and uncredited work. The Saharan location footage, shot in actual desert terrain with the documentary attention to the specific texture of a landscape, whose scale and emptiness the budget had been unable to avoid accurately representing, gives the zombie sequences a geographic specificity that the studio backlot could not have replicated. The Nazi zombies, emerging from the desert sand with the specific unhurried quality of something that has been waiting long enough that urgency is no longer a relevant concept, achieve a presence through patience that the faster zombie films of the same period consistently failed to produce through opposite means. The Dune sequence. The zombies emerging from the sand around the treasure hunter's camp. The specific geography of an inescapable situation, documented with Franco's characteristic camera patience, was the scene most cited by the international cult audience as the atmospheric achievement that separated Oasis of the Zombies from the Nazi zombie cycle's other entries. Oasis of the Zombies has been released through Severin Films in a restoration. Jesus Franco made approximately 50 more films. The Saharan locations have not been officially identified. The gold has not been recovered. Oasis of the Zombies used the desert's patience as its primary horror instrument. Hard Rock Zombies used something that no previous zombie film had attempted. A heavy metal concert, a town full of people who wanted the band dead, and the specific proposition that death was insufficient grounds for canceling a scheduled performance. Hard Rock Zombies, 1985, directed by Krishna Shah. A heavy metal band called Holy Moses travels to a small conservative town called Grand Guignol for a booking and is murdered by the town's residents, who include Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun living in retirement, before the band's guitarist uses an ancient spell to resurrect himself and his bandmates in time for the performance. Cannon Films released Hard Rock Zombies in 1985 through the American theatrical and VHS market, a distribution that the film's specific combination of elements had made commercially difficult to position, and that Cannon's existing infrastructure had accommodated through the same regional deals that moved its more conventional exploitation product. Krishna Shah made Hard Rock Zombies with the complete commitment to its own internal logic that the most formally strange films of the 1980s exploitation market share as their primary distinguishing quality. The Adolf Hitler retirement subplot, treated with the same dramatic seriousness as the zombie resurrection, the heavy metal performance sequences filmed with the same production attention as the murder sequences, the comedy and the horror occupying the same register without either one acknowledging the other's presence. The small-town setting, shot in actual California locations dressed to read as an isolated conservative community, gives the film a geographic specificity that the premise's specific satirical target. American small-town hostility to rock music, amplified to murderous extremity, needed to feel grounded rather than cartoonish. The concert sequence, the resurrected band, performing for a crowd that includes the townspeople who murdered them, the specific quality of a performance that death has made more rather than less committed, was the scene most cited by the cult audience as the formal achievement that established Hard Rock Zombies as something the zombie format and the rock film format had not previously achieved simultaneously. Hard Rock Zombies has been released through Vinegar Syndrome in a restoration. Krishna Shah made no further films. Adolf Hitler is portrayed by an actor. The heavy metal soundtrack was recorded specifically for the production. Hard Rock Zombies used a rock concert as its zombie delivery mechanism. Redneck Zombies used a barrel of toxic waste as its delivery mechanism. And Troma Entertainment's specific formal approach to the material produced something that the zombie format's existing critical vocabulary was not designed to address, because the vocabulary assumed a minimum level of production intention that Redneck Zombies had specifically declined to meet. Redneck Zombies, 1987. A barrel of military toxic waste is mistaken for moonshine ingredients by a family of rural Virginians, and the moonshine they produce from the contaminated barrel converts everyone who drinks it into a flesh-eating zombie, which the campers who arrive in the area shortly afterward discover before they have had sufficient time to process the information usefully. Troma Entertainment released Redneck Zombies directly to VHS in 1987, a distribution strategy that the film's production circumstances had made the only viable option, and that the Troma brand had developed the specific market infrastructure to execute. Pericles Lunas shot Redneck Zombies on Super 8 in rural Virginia, with a cast assembled from local talent and a practical effects budget that the production's total expenditure of approximately $10,000 had allocated with the specific prioritization of a filmmaker who understood that the gore effects were the product and everything else was the packaging. The rural Virginia setting, shot on actual farms and actual woodland with the documentary attention to the specific texture of southern rural life that the Super 8 format's limitations had made the production's primary visual quality, gives the film a geographic authenticity that the zombie premise's satirical target, rural American insularity, the specific social dynamics of communities that have organized themselves around their own distinctiveness, needed to feel observed rather than constructed. The moonshine sequence, the contamination, the conversion, the specific practical effects work that Lunas's team constructed from materials sourced from a local hardware store, was the image most cited by the Troma audience as the gore achievement that established Redneck Zombies' specific register within the Troma catalog's existing extreme content. Redneck Zombies has been released through Troma Entertainment. Pericles Lunas has worked primarily in makeup effects since completing the film. The rural Virginia locations are accessible. The toxic waste barrel has not been officially located. Different answers to the question George Romero had stopped asking because he had already answered it. None of them are Romero. None of them were trying to be. The best ones understood that the zombie format's conventions were a starting point rather than a destination, and that the destination was entirely their own problem to locate. The worst one on this list is more interesting than most films that knew exactly what they were doing. Leave in the comments which one you are watching first. Like and subscribe. Next time we go further into the decade's zombie filmography, to the films that the format produced when the budget was even lower and the ambition was even higher.